civilization that permeates every single cultural expression. We have a strong connection to ancestors across our entire continent. We have words that exist in languages in disparate corners of the African continent. So, that's what I mean by cultural unity. We are a people of one culture, despite the different manifestations of it, and despite propagations to the contrary, particularly down during the colonial time, to create division among themselves under the whole idea of divide and rule, which was the foremost idea advanced by the colonial powers. But prior to those times, this cultural unity was very strong. We worked among ourselves as people. Prior to now, as Rastafari, we talk about roots and culture. When we talk about roots and culture, which roots and which culture are we referring to? We need to be clear about that. We're not talking about anything on the surface level. We're connected to our African roots and African culture and our African culture. So that is going to come through strongly as well. Now, when Leonard Howell advanced this idea of Rastafari, because some people have placed it as the first Rasta, and in some contexts, yes, he is, but in other contexts, he's not. I can explain that later on as we progress. He established a great relation to Africa also by using continuities that existed in Jamaica, continuities that have come primarily from the Congo-Angola region of Africa through the practices of Kumina, which was very, very evident in Pinnacle, which was the base of Leonard Howell. Now there was a shift that occurred under what then was known as the Youth Black Faith. This Youth Black Faith were some young ones at the time who embraced Rastafari as advanced by Ras Wadie, who was also known as Kwadwo, that they felt that the elders who they came to meet were engaging in certain practices that they considered not to be pure. And most of these practices were practices that directly emanated from Africa as well. So we see the downplay of Kumina that was advanced by Leonard Howell, and then the introduction of what came to the terrorists and being. So people such as Ras Wadie, Brother Arthur, Brother Panhandle, Prince Emmanuel, etc. were the second, I would say, second group of Rastafari embraced this shift. But we're going to discuss more about these things as we move along now. But primarily, we are going to be looking at the anciency of the African worldview. When I say African worldview, Africans as a people, we have a worldview that is distinct and different from, for instance, the Eurocentric worldview. And one of the primary differences between the African worldview and the Eurocentric worldview is that the African worldview advances the idea of a world beyond just the physical world. In other words, there is in the African world the existence of the hidden world, or as I would put it, an unseen world that also impacts our world, and therefore our thoughts and our practices are also geared towards expressing what the impact of this unseen world is on the seen world or on the physical world. So I just wanted to lay that foundation before we proceed. Rastafari elder and otherwise, so for instance, Martin McLaren, he called for a new faculty of interpretation. What is that, or is this faculty of interpretation that Martin McLaren called for, is it new? Or is what we are engaging in a sacrifice? So when I say sacrifice, for those who may not know, sacrifice means return to the nation, to fetch it, to move forward into the future. It's an African concept, right? It's an African theoretical framework. So, Martin McLaren did call for this new faculty the Babylonian United Kingdom to come to Africa to meet a king and an emperor and an empress of Africa and bow before them. What do they know that we don't know? We're going to delve into those things as well. But keep the picture in mind. So, in line with our idea of divine kingship in African culture and how that informs Rastafari today, as I articulated earlier on, I'm doing this through the lens of Africa as a culturally unified landscape, and I'm rejecting any idea of Africa as an balkanized state. That is, I simply suggest that people who are just living as Europeans like to do, living in quote-unquote tribes and just fighting against each other over a piece of cocoyam or plantain. This is a totally wrong and erroneous picture that they try to portray of Africa, and as such, I'm rejecting that kind of organization. I'm also advancing the idea that Pan-Africanism is an ancient concept. And what do I mean by this? So when we even go back to ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt, the creation of ancient Egypt itself was a Pan-African idea. And what do I mean by this? The bringing together of the 42 nodes, that's the 42 regions to establish the Nile Valley civilization is an act of Pan-Africanism, drawing from all Africa. Secondly, the ancient Kemetini or ancient Egyptians themselves say that, first of all, their knowledge came from the south. Now, the south being areas such as, Nubia, Kush, we're going to talk about that, but even further south to the foothold of the Blue Mountain, which exists today from the country of Uganda, right, and beyond. So, and apart from that, the ancient Egyptians also mentioned several things, one of which is that the fact that the metal workers who came to the Nile Valley came from the western part of Africa. And we also know for a fact that metalworking has existed in the western part of Africa for a very long time. Among people such as the Bambara people of Mali, the Dogon people of Mali, the Edda people of Ghana. So for instance, in Ghana, for instance, there is in the Volta region a whole hill of ancient residue of metalwork in a place known as Napa. So this evidence aligns with what the ancient Egyptians said, that metalworkers came from Africa. In other words, there was a tradition of metallurgy which had been established in Western Africa that was brought to the Nile Valley to help in the establishment of that great African civilization. So here I'm also advancing the idea as of Pan-Africanism as not a new concept, but as an ancient concept that is also present today. Now, when we think of Rastafari, Africa is central to the worldview of Rastafari, right? So Rastafari, as we know, emerged out of Jamaica, also emerged out of the ideas of several people who were brought out of Africa into this place known as Jamaica. People coming out of the present day Angola, people from the present day Akan, people from Yoruba, present day Nigeria, also known as Nago, or as they call them Anago. And then we also have from the Fon people, we have from the Ibibio, the Igbo, etc., etc. And these are all facts that have been gathered from records from slave ships, but also linguistics, the language that is present among the Jamaican people today. So, the research of Maureen Warren-Lewis advances this idea that Africa is central to Rastafari knowledge and practices that I totally agree with it, and how also, as mentioned earlier on, advance such an idea. Now, what is divine kingship? Divine kingship is a political and spiritual concept where a ruler is seen as a god or a descendant of a god or as having been chosen by divine powers. Two aspects of divine kingship of Haile Selassie within this discussion will be made bare. There is the Ethiopian version of divine kingship, which is seen as elected Haile Selassie of God, like that's the elect of God. And then there is the Rastafari and others. I intentionally put others there because Rastafari is the only one who has this idea, which is elect as God. That is different. Now, I put this here because there is a difference between the liberty of Rastafari and the day-to-day conception of an ordinary Ethiopian, for instance. There are some who have advanced the idea of Rastafari making, for instance, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as part of the centrality of Rastafari. I beg to differ because I see the unity as different from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church also does not see Rastafari as something that should be a basic fact. There are many ones of us who want to join the church and were asked to shave off their locks and embrace the teachings of the church and all these kind of things. And other things that they have advanced in recent times, which we can go into later on. So when I am thinking of elect as God, I'm looking at it from the Rastafari perspective and elected God as from instance the Ethiopian perspective. Now all these are related to the idea of divine kingship. This concept of divine kingship is a very ancient concept, and it was a concept that was projected out to the world even before that power. But here in the United States, not far from where I am right now, there was this projection as well. And then Howard himself told the big again somewhere in 1931, 1932, that all he did was to come to Jamaica to establish the concept of the Rastafari rights that he had learned of with her on that. The idea of the divinity of the human. I want to emphasize that as Africans, we are born blind. We are not born in no sin. Nobody can come and tell us that we are born in any sin. Anybody can tell you that, shut up, because we are divine. We are born of the perfect black, our Father, and the children, as we're going to talk about as we proceed, made it out for our perfect African Trinity. And when we read the Hosea, for instance, it shows us that we are here to perfect our character, and therefore life is ever living. So, having discussed or defined divine kingship and looked at the continuity of divine kingship, even from that time on to this time, let us look at some examples of divine kingship that exist within the wider African landscape. So I want to start first with one of the most ancient, if not the most ancient, being the story of Osiris, who is known to the Greeks as Osiris, Oset, which was known to the Greeks as Isis, and Heru, known to the Greeks as Horus, representing what may be called today the original divine Trinity. And if we go deep into this story of Osiris, Oset, and Heru, which we can, I think, reserve for another time advancing the idea of how kingship and queenship, so to speak, came about. Now, within that same framework of thought, the first ever throne is the lap of Osiris, also known as Isis. So in the picture that we have on the screen, you would see that Heru is the child sitting on the lap of Osiris, Isis, being nourished. But at the same time, what you see on the head of Isis is a throne, a seat, a stool, representing Isis or Osiris as the original throne of the king, which is Heru. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. This is very fundamental to our African conception and ideas. So, author Frankfurt, 1948, talked about the divine kingship that existed in the ancient land when he said Pharaoh was not a mortal but a god. This was the fundamental concept of Egyptian kingship. The Pharaoh was the divine essence, a god incarnate, and this view can be traced back as far as texts and simple statements. In other words, when we look at this idea, we can find it not only in text, for instance, things that have been written and handed down to us for instance, the papyri, but we can also see this idea in ancient Egypt, ancient symbols, such as what has come to be known as the hieroglyphics or miniature, that is divine speech. So this idea, according to Frankfurt, can be traced very, very, very far into history. Let's look at some other African societies that advance this idea of divine kingship. When we look at the Republic of Congo, in the Luango kingdom, the king of Luango is treated by his people as though he were a god, and he's called Sambi and Pambo, which means God. Pinkerton, who wrote this in his book Voyages and Travels, volume 26. The Zimba people of southeastern Africa also have this idea or concept of divine kingship. According to McCall, in his book Records of Southeastern Africa, volume 7, the Zimbas of Southeast Africa worship their king as a god. They believe that only the king could supply them with rain. Again, here connected to concepts that are very familiar with the African framework of thought, such as the king, etc. So in other words, the king here becomes the primary supplier, and in this case of rain and everything else. When we look at Benin, the kingdom of Benin, this is from Captain Adams in his book Remarks on the Country from Cape Palmas to the River Congo. He says the king of Benin has been described as a god himself, whose subjects obey and adore him as such. British explorers of the Niger stated that Wida was believed by his subjects to be a god. Wida is a city in Benin, so just as in modern times when somebody is referring to, for instance, the government of the United Kingdom, they would say London, or the government of the United States, they would say Washington, in the very same manner, referring to the kingdom of Benin, here referred to as Wida. In Nigeria, among the Jukun, this is from also Captain Adams Remarks on the Country from Cape Palmas to the River Congo. The king of Jukun is regarded as a god incarnate. So this is the present-day king of Jukun, who you see on your screen. Among the Shilluk of South Sudan, the concept of divine kingship is present here as well. The king of Shilluk is seen as having control over the forces of nature and is worshipped as a god by his people. This is from 7 responsible for ensuring a bountiful harvest. The king's seed is the first to be sown before everyone else. This is from Meek in his book, Tribal Studies. So, these examples, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of the idea of divine kingship. Indeed, one can say that this idea of divine kingship is very strong and permeates through our conception of what kingship is in our African framework. I compare with Warren Lewis that the concept was introduced to Caribbean Africa. But then we have to also ask, now, this same idea has existed in ancient Kenya. The idea that the coronation elevates the person, so to speak, from being an ordinary person to a person who is imbued with divine qualities. So, from 1948 says the Pharaoh did not become God. Pharaoh simply was a god. His divinity was proclaimed at a certain moment. His coronation was not an apotheosis, but an epiphany. At the coronation of Haile Selassie, in his acceptance speech, he also makes reference to such an idea when he says, I give all praise and glory to Almighty God, who has raised me, elevated me to the throne of my forefathers. The question has to be also asked, which forefather, right? And allowed me to serve his purpose among my people. It is no hidden knowledge that in his autobiography, Emperor Haile Selassie also mentions that he returned, did a sarcophagus, so to speak, to the past to bring back something that was done in very ancient times, but which had endured some kind of digression from being the fact that the coronation of the emperor and the empress occurred at the same day. So Emperor Haile Selassie made sure that at the coronation he was crowned together with the empress Mene. So by so doing, Emperor Haile Selassie restored the balance. In his book, the autobiography, My Life in Ethiopia's Progress, he says, the procedure for the enthronement of the empress is to be very different from what it used to be previously. But now, it was determined after consultation that the archbishop should place the crown on her as the empress and put the diamond ring on her finger, and that this should happen the same day, jointly with the coronation of the emperor. So we see that in modern times, when it comes to monarchies of the world, which have gone through the process of a coronation, we can say without any iota of doubt that it is only the one that occurred in 1910 Ethiopia that saw the king and the queen, or the emperor and the empress, so to speak, being crowned on the same day. When we talk about the triple crown, as I mentioned before, sometimes we like to think of it in terms of an actual crown which has 3 tiers, and that is fine, but there is also a different dimension because Haile Selassie was crowned 3 times. That is first as a regent, and then as a king, and then as an emperor. And anytime this happens, it also happened for emperors as well. So, restoring the balance. Now, having introduced divine kingship, having looked at some examples of divine kingship that exist on the African continent, having we look at how the ritual of coronation elevates one to the essence of the divine realms, we're going to ask ourselves a question. What is the oldest throne in the world? And where is this oldest throne in the world? And not only who sits upon this oldest throne in the world, where did this idea of divine kingship originate so as to make whoever is occupying thrones in Africa assume this divine dimension? Let's look at responding to this question and the other related question. So first, I want to draw from an American newspaper, the Courier News of Blythenville, Arkansas, which was published on the 3rd of December 1974. And it says, as the subtitle, The Old Throne. And it reads, as Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia occupied the world's oldest throne and headed a dynasty that traced its origins to the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. Now, I want to say this. Even if we take this story of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon as a literal story and not a metaphorical, here we see that it is presented as the oldest throne in the world. In other words, there is no throne in the modern world that is older than when the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon's son, Menelik I, established his throne in Ethiopia. Now, we're going to flash some passages out, which also, I want to speak to the fact that all the Ethiopian thrones, all the European thrones, none of them was even conceived of, even at the time that the Queen of Sheba was said to have traveled to King Solomon. And this is about 800 BC. But we are going to see that is this even the oldest throne, right? Also from the Edwardsville Intelligence from Edwardsville, Illinois, 31st January 1971. Haile Selassie is the 226th monarch to sit upon the world's oldest throne, that of Ethiopia. So here again, this newspaper is also reporting that the world's oldest throne is that of Ethiopia, right? And it goes on to talk about the population of Ethiopia, etc. Also, from this newspaper clipping, Haile Selassie I is from the longest of the Royalty lines. His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I, the conquering line of the tribe of Judah elected God, Emperor of Ethiopia, is amongst a personification and a contradiction of his title. The Emperor, who will spend part of 2 days at Oklahoma A&M College, is only stopped on a flight from California to Mexico City, is a descendant of the oldest and longest line of royalty in recorded history. Now, what has all this to do with anciency? Let's talk about Kush, Ethiopia. Now, in order for me to do so, I have to lay a certain foundation. The word Kush has been in ancient times applied to the entire population of black people in Africa. And so has the word Ethiopia been used not only in reference to what we know today as Ethiopia, which was at one time called Abyssinia, but in reference to the entire population of black people in Africa as well. So we're going to see such terms as Kush, Ethiopia, and then we are also going to be looking at terms such as Nubia, and in terms such as Tasseti. I just wanted to clear it up. I really like this image of ancient nobles of Kush, Nubia, that is, active. When Swami Krishnananda gifted the Ramayana to the Ethiopian king Haile Selassie, the Ramayana, I'll talk about it momentarily. The king that is Haile Selassie said that he had already read it because he considered himself a Kushite, a term used for Africans in ancient texts. In fact, the Bhagavata Purana refers to Africa as Kushitika and its people as Kushites. So these are Ramayana is an ancient Hindu epic, and the Bhagavata Purana is also ancient Hindu text. So even among the Indians, the black people of Africa, in ancient scripts were referred to as Kushitika or Kushites. And we see that in the Greek Herodotus historian refers to the Western Ethiopians and the Eastern Ethiopians. And the Western Ethiopians being the black people of Africa, and then the Eastern Ethiopians being the people, original people of India before the advancement of the Aryans from the Caucasus Mountains to what is present in India. So even when we look today at the southern parts of India, and even look at the population of the Andaman Islands, we see people who are Africans being the inhabitants of these areas. So Kush again is reminiscent of black African people as well. In her book, The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire by Drusilla Daji Houston, she indicates that the ancient name of the landmass of Africa was Kushite people. This is also the name mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, as I mentioned earlier on, an ancient Hindu text, and also the Ramayana, the ancient Hindu epic, which records the activities and the pastimes of the Indian Lord Ramachandra. So here the point that I'm articulating here is Kush, Ethiopia, Nubia, land of the black people. Now, ancient Kemet and Kush. Now, Kush also known in ancient times as Tasseti. Tasseti meaning the land of the bow. That is the bow that is used in the bow and arrow. If you read ancient texts, you will hear a lot about King Tahaka and how the people of this region were known as the best Paramount when it came to bow throwing. So Tasseti being the land of the bow. It is also important to note that Kemet did not only originate in the south, that is the south of Kemet, in Nubia, Kush, Ethiopia, but that in very ancient times, the Egyptians and the Nubians were one and the same. The distribution of Nubia and ancient Kemet only came about because of the so-called Egyptologists who particularly became prominent in the 19th and 20th centuries, who sought to advance an idea to the world that the ancient Egyptians were not an African people, and therefore decided to separate ancient Kemet from ancient Nubia. And as I mentioned earlier on, cementing that with the construction of the Aswan Dam and burying a whole lot of artifacts down there. But in as much as the tribes of bury, many more are present for us to witness today. The writer, historical writer, Diodorus Siculus, also known as Diodorus of Sicily, also whose European writer states that the Ethiopians, Kush, say that the Egyptians, Kemet, are one of their colonies. And I want to emphasize here, not in the sense of colonial, as we have endured under the British, the French, and so on, but in the sense of the people moving to a different area. And here the Egyptians say that this was brought into Egypt by Osiris. Here again, Osiris having been a living man, Osiris, as we spoke about earlier, who had been elevated to the position of a god king. It is from them, again, there is that the Egyptians have learned to honor kings and gods and bury them with such pomp. And here I underline buried with such pomp because in the song that I started with from midnight said, I am the living archaeology and I am the living anthropology. In archaeology and anthropology, it is said that you can learn about how complex the civilization history was based on the burial practices of the people, right? In other words, the more complex the burial practices, the more complex the society was. And here we underline buried with such pomp. Here, the universe also says that sculpture and writing were invented by the Ethiopians, in other words, the Kush. The Kushites, we also know that even though the hieroglyphic script today has been deciphered and is able to be interpreted, the Meroitic script, which is the precursor to the hieroglyphic, still remains undeciphered. And this was, brought about before the hieroglyphic. The Ethiopians cite evidence that they are more ancient than the Egyptians. So here the term Ethiopian being applied to all Black Africans. So when we think about Kush, as a defined territory, we look at an area which today is south of what we know as Egypt, is in the Nile Valley, and it's encompasses the Blue and the Wild regions. Again, this same region being referred to as Nubia, a greater part of it being in what is in present-day Sudan, a part of it in present-day Ethiopia, and also a part of it in present-day Egypt. So Nubia was known as Kush for over 2,000 years. Nubia covered the same, or roughly the same area as Kush did, as shown in the preceding maps. So what is the importance of Kush Nubia to the oldest known in the world? On 1st March 1979, the New York Times carried an article on its front page written by Boris Rensberger with the headline, Nubian Monarchy Called Oldest. In the article, Rensberger wrote, evidence of the oldest recognizable monarchy in human history, preceding the rise of the earliest Egyptian kings by several generations, has been discovered in artifacts from ancient Nubia. He estimated that the first kings of Tasseti may well have ruled around 5,900 BC. So, earlier on, we saw the newspapers talking about the Queen of Sheba that is 800 BC being the oldest tomb in the world, which is in Africa. Very good. We're happy about that. But even before the Queen of Sheba's throne, that is, traces back to somewhere around 5,900 BC, we see this idea of kingship, divine kingship, being established in this Nubian region, right? So this is also an artifact here. The kingdom of Tasseti stretched from northern Sudan to south of Kenya. As I mentioned earlier, Tasseti is also known as Kush of ancient Ethiopia. Many female heads of state known as Kentucky or Kentucky sometimes referred to also as Candice, meaning Queen Mother ruled in Tasseti. When we think of people like Shakir and these great mothers who ruled in this Nubian region. The main deities were Hebu, Osset, and Klu, who became also Egyptian deities later on. Now, sticking keen with the idea of the oldest woman in the world, Bruce Williams, an archaeologist and researcher at the University of Chicago, shares this perspective. A newly discovered ancient kingdom is always a matter of interest. But when it precedes the earliest known monarchy, which is the unification of Egypt in the 4th millennium BC, which was the unification of the red and the white crowns, under Emperor Menes, Menes, who is also known as Nara by the Greeks. The place of the establishment of this divine monarchy is ancient India at a place known as Cusco, where the investigation of archaeological material recovered during the mid-1960s rescue effort has recently unveiled the birthplace of pharaonic civilization several generations before the rise of the first historic Egyptian dynasty, which means that the idea of divine kingship existed even before the first Old Kingdom king of ancient kingdoms of ancient Egypt, being Ahamenes, who united the two crowns, that is the red and the white crowns, and established a unified ancient kingdom. But this idea was even present in the Nile Valley prior to the dynastic period, right? The great Ivan Ramses also comments on this. According to him, many palaces were found in this region along with Falcon deity known as Horus by the Greeks and Heru by the Africans, which is later found in Canada. The beginnings of building the church, which is what is commonly referred to as hieroglyphics, which is a sacred writing system, were also found in this region. One of the most significant finds was the crown of the south. That was before the unification of Canaan by Ahamenes. This was found on the heads of a dozen pharaohs prior to the first ever pharaoh being crowned in Canaan. So, the Nubian origin of the idea of the monarchy is well established. Divine kingship and the origin of kingdoms, and by extension the Nile Valley, are inextricably intertwined, which means that we cannot separate the idea of divine kingship from the place of the origin of divine kingship. The placement of the monarchy in Nubia before it appears in Kemet could also place the origins of the people of ancient Egypt in the south. So, Marcus 1997 is saying that the fact that when we trace the idea of divine kingship, we can trace it all the way to Nubia in the south, also suggests that the original people of ancient Egypt also came from this region. And this is what they themselves have said. Now, people today will talk about, so how Ptolemy and all these other people. Now, like when we take, for instance, America. Today, when you come to America, you're going to see a whole lot of Europeans. Does that mean that Europeans were the original people in America? Absolutely not. Right? In the same way, the Ptolemies and the Greeks, prior to the Ptolemies were the Greeks. For instance, the Greeks such as Herodotus, Aristotle, all these others came to stay in ancient Canaan. And then later on, when they took over, they became the prominent rulers of the land prior to even Rome. But that does not mean that the original people or the people who even created the civilization. This civilization was created by black Africans. So, having talked about the location of the origin of the monarchy in the south, we're going to cast our minds to the place which is today known as Jebel Bakr. Jebel Bakr is an Arabic word, or phrase, but the original name being Nesut Tawi. So here in this mountain is what we will refer to as a place of many temples dedicated to this original divine kinship, which was originated in this part of Africa. So here we see a kind of model construction of what it would have looked like, and it goes all around this particular site. Now, this particular site is also where the temple of Amun, the ram-headed deity, existed. Now, today, a whole lot of religions today say Amen, Ami, and all these days when they offer their prayers. All these are coming from the name of Amun, from this original Nesutawi Jebel. So, the throne of the two lands, from its very founding, Apata, which is also what was a city-state in this Caribbean region, the greatest importance of Apata was that it hosted the site of Jebel, or the site of Nesutawi, what the Egyptians called in the language the pure mountain, Juba'a, and the throne of the two lands, Nesutawi, believing that the hill was occupied by the primeval, the most ancient form of the deity of Amun. Now, when we try to put Amun in context, his full title was Lord of the Thrones of the Two Lands. Which two lands? The two lands which were united under Emperor Ahamenes, also known as Naaman by the Greeks. This Lord who dwells within the pure mountain of Apata, there's a mountain that we just saw in the Sitani or Jebel, the great God on the land of heaven. So why Nesutani? Why Jebel? Jebel was singled out for special veneration because of its pinnacle, the pinnacle that we saw on the mountain, which in the imaginations of our ancestors suggested a gigantic supernatural being combining within himself, because Amun is known as the hidden one, but also the one in whom everything is, combining within himself a phallus, a serpent, and a tall conical man. So the picture we see down here is a representation of Amun, and we will see as we talk about why this is important. Now, on the crowns of the kings of the Nile Valley, we see what is known as the Reyes, which is what we see on the screen. The Reyes is a symbol of divine royalty. It's a stylized upright form of Nile Valley cobra, which is used as a symbol of supreme power, sovereignty, royalty, deity, and divine authority in the ancient Nile Valley. This is coming from So here we see also another close-up of what is known as the Ureus. This is I would say, the sculpture of the young Tutankhamun. So let's quickly watch a short video clip on Jebel Bakr and see it will pay. No, it's not sharing. Okay, let me stop sharing for a second and then try to pull it out. Otherwise, let's do this. All right.
Egyptian pharaoh Moses I invaded Kush to eliminate the growing threat and get direct access to the gold he covered. His army plunged south until they reached a sacred view called Jebel.
Sorry, because sometimes you listen if you can hear and see the screen. Alright, give thanks. I'm gonna start.
In about 1500 BC, Egyptian pharaoh Moses I invaded Kush to eliminate the growing threat and get direct access to the gold he covered. His army plunged south until they reached a sacred view called Jebel, or Pure Mountain. On its southwest face, a nearly 250-foot pinnacle pierces the sky. For Kushites, its unmistakably phallic shape made it a symbol of creation and fertility. But according to archaeologist Tim Kendall, the Egyptians saw a more important meaning in the mountain.
What made this mountain so powerful and meaningful to the ancient Egyptians was the fact that it had this gigantic spire-like pinnacle on its south face that reminded them of multiple things that had great religious meaning.
On one hand, it looked like a rearing cobra. On the other hand, it looked like the standing king, Osiris, the mythical first king of Egypt.
In Egyptian mythology, cobras have a powerful connection to kingship. Goddesses take the shape of the cobra to protect the king. That's why they appear on the crowns of pharaohs, including King Tut. Kendall believes it was probably a high priest accompanying the invasion who first saw the connection. Like a giant religious rorschach test, the mountain revealed its importance before his very eyes. Jebel Barka was deemed magnificent enough to be the birthplace of the god of gods.
Confirmed the king's feeling that he was the rightful ruler of this place. Here was the center of the primeval god that started kingship here, and he was the heir of this kingship, and he had an absolute right to rule Kush.
Alright, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to try to share again. So, as I get to round up, one of the things that was found during these excavations was what is referred to as the coastal incense burner. This is a burner that was used by the people of ancient Libya, and on this burner, there are several things that show the origin of divine kingship in this particular area. The coastal incense burner dates back to 6-7 generations before the first dynasty of Emperor Ahmed, also known as Islam, and it furnishes the earliest definite representation of a king in recorded history. The Isabella is distinctively Nubian in form, carved in the technique of Nubian rock art, decorated on the rim with typical Nubian designs, was found in the tomb of Nubian Akusto and incorporates images associated with Egyptian pharaohs, a procession of sacred gods, the white crown of Upper Egypt, the falcon deity, and the palace facade are known as the Serek. It appears to represent a ritual that involved a royal procession by boat to the palace. So here again, the idea of palaces having even been talked about in other parts of the world, we see was existed in association with the idea of divine kingship in the Nile Valley thousands of years ago. So this whole idea of our king as our God is not something that is new to the African mind. Now, we as Rastafari, therefore, when we talk about Muslim culture, should be looking at any Rastafari within our African culture. We don't need any validation from any books of Eurocentric origin, of authors of questionable character, such as King James, the same person who wrote the book, Demonology, and as historically known, is a very questionable character, and his motivation for putting forward these kind of texts. Now, through divine kingship and queenship, we can advance, and we should, because this idea is also not lost on Leonard Howard, who is, according to the title of the first Rasta, which even though is questionable in some respects, but also very much so in other respects. We can also be sure that the God of our historical enemies cannot be metamorphosed into our God through the back door. What do I mean by that? You can be sure that if we simply transplant our concept of Rastafari onto a template that has been provided by our historical enemies, all that we've done is to come to the back door to hail the same God that they have used to colonize us. And this conception must be rejected. So when we talk about African faculty of interpretation, this is an example of such a faculty of interpretation. And this faculty of interpretation must be seen into the future. Anything that comes and tells us that we should abandon the ways of our forefathers and foremothers, the template of our forefathers and foremothers, the ideas of our forefathers and foremothers, is nothing but a colonizing principle which must be rejected. So as Rastafari, we seek to connect what we know today with the ideas and conceptions of our forefathers and foremothers. Anything short of that will be totally rejected. And Rastafari, not connected to our African culture, will not be a force for our liberation. So, I give thanks for the time, I give thanks for the audience, and I want to conclude with a paraphrase quotation of the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey. We Negroes believe in the God of Ethiopia, the everlasting God. That is the God in whom we believe, but we shall worship Him through the spectacles of Ethiopia. Give thanks, Rastafari.
Rastafari, give thanks for freedom. That is something. what we have heard, the fact that divinity started over ancient Kush through Kemet, even to current African tribes, we still see this kinship or this divinity in there. So we give thanks for giving us this information, and especially on the concluding part that we based our definition or we based our Rastafari knowledge and practice based on our African culture. So we give thanks for that. At this stage, I want to see if anybody has a comment or a question that you'd like to share. Yes, so please, if you have a question or comment, you can put forth your hand. Or at this stage, nobody is ready, so you can just come up and pick up your question if that's.
Thank you, Sister Sadia, for the question. I think it's a great question, but at the same time, we have to know ourselves. In fact, this was an inscription also left to us by our forefathers and foremothers. Know yourself. It is only when we know ourselves do we have that confidence, knowledge, and ability to step into the future courageously, as His Majesty said. Without knowing ourselves, we cannot make that kind of impact that we need to make. And I agree with you, as Rastafari, there is more room for improvement in terms of our impact. But we can also, we should not shy away from the fact that impact is being made even on a daily basis, as our efforts are being felt in our communities around the world. That is not to say that we should pat ourselves on the back and feel like we're doing so much, because we can still do more. But at the same time, this information that you're referring to as being presented here is necessary, because without the knowledge of who we are, of our past, we are not able to move into the future and make that kind of grand impact that we need to make. So I think that as we continue on our track, it is important to also equip ourselves with the kind of knowledge that will make us see our greatness and our centrality to this world. We are the fathers and mothers of creation, but today we are walking around as if we are the babies in this world. You tell us to go here and then, fella said, don't be there, we just follow. Tell us to do this, then we just do. But we are the fathers and mothers of this world. Science has proven that. Religion has proven that. Archaeology has proven that. Anthropology has proven that. There is no question about that. But the only kind of people who do not seem to know these things is I and I think that is a design to keep us uninformed so that we don't step into our greatness. So the importance of such information sharing gatherings is to re-equip ourselves with the kind of knowledge that we will embrace in seeking a definition to who we are and our greatness and centrality and originality of this world as we step into the future. So give thanks.
Greetings, Daddy.
Yes, I give thanks. And I think what said at the end is that it's African struggle. Like I've always been saying, the movement, the face of Rastafari is all things. These are all contributions to the evolution of the soul. And what I would say would be that how do we disseminate the transformation of actual, what you call it, put it up on our YouTube. I believe we should move on to a situation where last time the publicity committee was having a conversation, and part of the conversation bordered on extracting snippets of presentation, because maybe somebody may not be able to digest the full 2 hour long video, long form video. But shorts could be made where, let's say, a 2 or 3 minute, or even a 2 minute clip, but you the attention span short. So, let's say maybe on the point of the examples of God King, that can be like in 1 minute, 90 edited short form video, that somebody would watch again and again. So the point I'm suggesting is, in this particular presentation by God, it would cut it up a certain way and then start sharing it. Those are some of the ways that such knowledge is disseminated and accumulated a bit more faster. Because now everybody's taking food. You see something interesting, send it to his friend, thing goes viral. So that's what I was thinking. But brilliant presentation, bro. Very insightful. Give thanks.
Give thanks, Papa Botto. I think I totally agree with you. And I think, behind the scenes, we will talk about, how that can be actualized. So many thanks for your suggestion.
So, give clarifications. My question is, which name now should Africa be called? Because we wanted to go to understanding of Africa instead of the one given to us by the Western countries, and Italy.
So, I know there is some kind of idea being floated around that the name Africa is not of African origin. But historically, if you look at the general who went into Rome, Africanus, it was because of him that the Romans were referring to Africa as Africa because of his name. So, I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea of that. And besides, I think that as part of our forward movement, we talk about self-determination. If at a certain point in time we determine as a collective that we want to move away from the name Africa, then we can come up with a name. Because people have suggested Al-Kebulan, which is not bad, but then Al-Kebulan is also, of a foreign origin. So in other words, if people are trying to run away from Africa as a name to Al-Kebulan, it's like, how some people say, well, I don't want to be called Jerry anymore, but then I want to be called, for instance, El Rashid, right? I mean, we just moved from one colonizer to the other. So that's what I would say in that regard. I think that for right now, that is the term that we have. Besides, until we have that self-determination to come out as a collective and say, well, we want to change our name from Africa to the other or whatever it is, we will have to work with what we have right now. That's my thought on that.
Yes, give thanks, Rastafari. Do we have another comment or question? Yes, Prof.
I want to. Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, that was a very great educational discourse. I really appreciated it. As far as for the self-determination, as we were talking about with Ethiopia being that being our origin, why not, that be our name? Because we are both Ethiopians at home and abroad. So that could be, because I know I was looking at some maps, and some of the older maps did show all of Africa and even the Atlantic Ocean as being Ethiopian. And from my studies, I found that Ethiopian is not actually Roman. It actually comes from the Ethiopian king, whose name was Ethiops. So that's actually indigenous. So why don't we all just consider ourselves, or once we get to that point, just refer to ourselves as simply Ethiopian?
Yeah, give thanks for that sound. Absolutely. I think that while we are Ethiopians, because as you mentioned, the ancient maps show the whole of Africa and also the Atlantic Ocean in fact, the Atlantic Ocean was known as the Ethiopian Sea until it was changed to the Atlantic Ocean. However, the word Ethiops comes from the Greek language, which means the sunburnt faces, right? So, even though we would like to embrace the idea of having the name of the Ethiopian king, that name itself is also of Greek origin. I'm not saying that we cannot use it. I don't think we should be dwelling so much on names, but if we are to look at the origins, then it also raises that question. Give thanks for the contribution.
If I could just respond to that, though, you know that there is a book known as the John Shoah. It was, I'll put in the link, but it was an Ethiopian scholar that found the book in Ethiopia, and that book, the John Shoah, also known as the Book of the Wars of the Lord, in Ge'ez, it talks about the origin of the word Ethiopian, and said it was the son of Melchizedek, whose name was Etiel, and after Melchizedek was blessed by God, his name became Ethiops, and then was later transformed to Ethiopia. And they were saying that word, that book proves that it's not actually the Greeks that gave Ethiopia that name. It's actually indigenous, which would make sense as to why His Imperial Majesty changed it from Abyssinia to Ethiopia, not as a Greek designation, but that being originally indigenous to that land.
Well, give thanks for that, and I give thanks that you volunteered to put the link in the chat. That would be great edification for I give thanks.
So I just wanted to add a small comment as to Raswiro, as you touched on the divinity of, the divinity of kings of Africa. And I wanted to also point to the fact that just from the biblical reading, it says that we are gods. We ourselves are gods. When the question was posed, don't you know that ye are gods? So that's another thing that we have to consider for ourselves, to know our greatness. Our kings are gods and ourselves are God as well. And I have heard some modern advocates saying that sometimes if you are praying, pray to yourself, because you are God as well. So if you want to throw some light on that, comment. That would be great.
Well, I give thanks for the comment. I think you said it all, right? Indeed, we are gods and goddesses, right? This idea is a very ancient idea. In fact, in the Cree language, there is a proverb, very old proverb, and it says this. I'm going to say it in Cree and then I'll translate it into English. Se uhwehwɛ ɔdom ankoma na sɛ wohyia w'agya ne w'ana san w'akyi ɛsiane sɛ woahu ɔdom ankoma. So let me explain that in English. It says that when you're going to go and look for the Almighty God, and on your way to go look for the Almighty God, you meet your father and mother, return, because you have met the Almighty God in your father and in your mother. So I'm just, saying that to support what you just said, Sister Sadia, that yeah, indeed, we are gods. Give thanks. And quickly before we go, so Babylon, and all apologies to Rascosi and Bako. I'm so sorry about to say it. They came and they gave us another saying, which tried to obscure our original thought. And that saying was that if you are going to church and you meet a white man, turn, because you have seen God. So we see how, Babylon always tries to get into our psyche with these kind of things to kind of shift our mentality from our God self to a mentality of enslaved minds. And that's why we totally agree with Marcus Garvey and with Bob Marley, who said, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, because none of them can free our minds. Give thanks.
It's that stuff. Is there any more questions or comments?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Yes, John.
Yes, sir. Blessed. Brother Will, Isis, give thanks. Right, so, yes, sir, Majesty. I wanted to know how to delineate this over Christianizing of Rastafari, because I think the basis sometimes emanates from the divinity issues, because you see people trying to bring out the basis of
the Solomonic lineage, 225th, the Order of David, and it actually breaks back into Judeo-Christianism. So how do we delineate that? In establishing the divinity, how do we delineate that?
Give thanks. You're right. The whole idea of looking at the divinity through, for instance, the lineage of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon and all these things. But the point here is that we don't need to do that. We have an way more ancient way of validating our own divinity from our own ancient concepts. In Africa, way before even the Queen of Sheba or King Solomon appeared, right? So that the point is that there is a way, and it's based on history, it's based on facts, it's based on culture, it's based on our own African worldview, and that is what man has sought to present in this particular presentation. Now, let me flash out a little bit more. I think that I mentioned in the presentation of the distinction between elect of God and elect as God. We should never lose sight of the fact that nobody has seen God, so to speak. We create gods, right? So as humans, there is no religion that can lay claim to any kind of particular God, right? But it's through our experience, it's through our living archaeology, it's through our living anthropology, it's through our historical knowledge and cultural diffusion that we are able to come to certain conclusions. And in the case of Africa, our observations from very ancient time has been based on the observation of nature. When we look at the Nile Valley, when we look at everywhere in Africa, it is our observation of nature that informs us. I started by talking about the seen world and the unseen world. So for us, it is what we see that allows us to draw certain conclusions about what is not seen, right? And so if we talk about His Majesty now, and we're talking about divinity, we articulate the divinity of His Majesty based on the idea of our King as our God, which is also valid. It is not in dispute. So yes, if ones and ones want to look at it even from the lineage of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, that is fine, because that is also, that throne is even older than any throne in the world. But even we can't even stop there. We can go as far back as to the first ever recorded throne in history, which is still the oldest. So give thanks for that question, and give thanks for the opportunity to respond.
Yes, Ras, thank you.
So His Majesty is now attending. Why do we still
Well, historically speaking, His Majesty was known as Rastafari before he was crowned as emperor, right? Ras meaning, as we all know, like a regent, someone in command of a certain area, and Tafari meaning one to be feared. Now, in terms of why we still refer to ourselves as Rastafari or refer to him as Rastafari, because this is also his name. This is just my view. We are called Rastafari, not necessarily, Selassie or anything, even though we hail His Majesty based on both names. But from the early conception of, the Rastafarites and even Leonard Howell, it was the name Rastafari that seemed to have come through stronger, even though he had been crowned emperor and had assumed the title of a name of Haile Selassie. So, great question, but as to how we still call Rastafari and not Highlands or it will be a matter of speculation. But it seems that the name Rastafari is the one that has persisted.
Because many people, the emperor is bigger than Ras.
True.
So I don't think we should be demoting the king down to a Ras. If we want to follow his movement with the movement, we call ourselves Rastafari, fine, but his name is
I totally agree, and I think that even comes through when we say Kedemawi Haile Selassie. That is more referring to his emperorship, and then before he became an emperor, Nigos Tafari, right, and then it was Rastafari. I agree with you.
Quick question, though. At the same time, isn't the name Tafari name article, first given name, versus Haile Selassie? Like I said, in a Akan culture, for instance, you can be born and given a name, but when you assume the throne, you acquire another name, right? But I would say that your first name kind of holds a little more, if you ask me. So that could also be, an explanation for that. Like you said, for both names are their names are history. And if we start identifying with one name, I think it's just okay. Just go with that, but with any type of component, everything we need to know something as this.
All right. Rastafari, both of them are legitimate, especially in America here, people with the locks. So you walk up to a man and say Rastafari, he's supposed to know, say Selassie at first. So we have to use every single thing is legitimate. Because how come we're not known as Selassieites? We're not known as Selassieites. We are known as Rastafari. So it's a code where you can tell who is who. You're supposed to, if you pass a dreaded and you say Selassie, you're supposed to say Rastafari. And if you say Rastafari, you're supposed to say Selassie. So it's a way that we can know each other. Remember, Selassie the shepherd, Rastafari the sheep.
Distance.
As far as I know, somebody is message that. Somebody says blessed. If you tell me like, because to me I will only sorry. Do you have the number? Sorry.
Yes.
I was trying to say that the Imperial Majesty met someone. And then the person said, oh, Rastafari. He said he had a picture of Rastafari on his wall. And then Rastafari said he should have a picture of Emperor Haile Selassie on your wall. I think then we have to call him Tafari. If we add the Selassie and the Ras to it, we are demoting the emperor back to a Ras. That is why I'm making this decision, because the Emperor Haile Selassie. we mentioned when we meet each other or we want to refer to the king last year.
Yes, give thanks for the comment. Jack, radio culture.
Yeah. Ras Island culture. Both is legitimate, like I said, it's a code to find out who is who and who is who. If I pass a Rastafari on the road that I don't know, and I say Rastafari, you know how much time I pass some people with dreadlocks and I say Rastafari, and it's a test because them usually say, "Who? What did you say, man? Who?" Them don't know when we are talking about. But a legitimate Rastaman supposed to answer me and say Selassie, and so we both know who we are dealing with. You understand? So the body can't function without the head. The Rasta will always be there. These are just manifestations of life. So my brother might call me, my brother not to call me Iras lyrical culture. My brother will call me by the name of the parents, give me. But me know who is who, and me know who we matter about same way. So we have to keep both of them, brother. As it is, we have to, as it stand right now, because how we are going to know who is who? If me pass a Rastaman and me say Rastafari, and him don't know what me talk about. And him don't know what me talk about. No problem with that. Him and a Rasta then. Him supposed to answer me. Selassie I the first. And that him supposed to answer me. And if I say to him first, Selassie I the first, him supposed to now answer Rastafari. And the code for your pass through, my lord. I hear.
If Jah beloved, you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. I was just saying that I think that semantics really, I think it's just semantics because black lyrical culture actually put it to rest. Because if you hear a man, Rastafari, he will respond to Selassie. If you hear Selassie, he'll respond to Rastafari. So I think it's, same on one. But the point I was going to make really is that we give a lot of thanks for today's presentation. It's very, 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 very important, very crucial to, especially to young rappers who are trying to conceptualize the idea of what Rastafari really is, right? Especially for those of us who grew up against the Judeo-Christian backdrop, where you thought that it's blasphemy to even think that a man can be God, right? So it's a subject that people will even have a long haul, right? When you feel highly selected, then it turns into a comedic subject for some people because it's either you're blaspheming or you're cracking a joke. Now, the importance of this subject, however, breaks it all home for me, and I think this is something that we have to find a way to propagate it to a lot more people. Why? First of all, to disabuse our minds of that Judeo-Christian paradigm where everything has to be measured against that. Because if you really look into it, how come a man who was born of a woman trod the earth as Jesus Christ and people accept that to be God? And then a man who sits on a royal throne with mystic antecedents cannot be accepted as God, But now we look beyond the Judeo-Christian paradigm and we see cultures which are not ancient, which are not different, but which are very close and similar to our own culture, and these are exhibiting examples of a divine and royal leader. So that the example of Haile Selassie as our king and judge is not a one-off story, nor is it something to be sneered at, because there are many examples predating the Judeo-Christian concept, right, where a royal, divine king is unacceptable now. So that's how important this lecture is for. And I want to say it was very well presented. Thank you very much. I'm sure we will have the audio format published on the Rastafari website. And let me also take the quick opportunity to announce that we will be launching the Rastafari.com, Rastafari Ghana, Rastafari Council.com website, and it's going to have some very refreshing material. So I will enjoy all of us checking it and sharing material, but definitely this should be on that platform. And I want to say thank you again for a sterling presentation.
So, what I would, a humble request I'd like to make is, can we have this as an essay that we could put on the site and then have in the next edition of the newsletter? That is in addition to the various forms we have suggested earlier that it be disseminated, that is in short form videos and things like that. But Prof, could you write it out as an essay for us to have in the next edition of the newsletter and also on the website? Give thanks.
Give thanks, Papa Bosco. Quick question: when is the next edition of the newsletter, please?
February.
Okay. All right. Give thanks. Yeah, sure.
Give thanks.
Yes, give thanks. Any more question or comments before we wrap up? So yes, it's 58 minutes past 8. We'll invite Prof to give us his closing remarks. Give thanks.
Well, first of all, I want to say give thanks to the Education Commission of the Rastafari Council of Ghana. I want to say give thanks to the President, Papa Bosco. I want to say give thanks to Ras Kofi Asante, Seven Fireside, and everybody else whose name I have not mentioned that works behind the scenes to make sure that we have such opportunities to share knowledge. I want to also recognize Papa Ganali, who is present. Give thanks for his presence. But I think that, it has been said that, we are stepping out of the age of Pisces and stepping into the age of Aquarius. And the name, the age of Aquarius is the age of knowledge. And so, as our forefathers and foremothers said, and even Bob Marley also echoed this, that, as Rastafari, we seek knowledge over belief, because, we can believe in anything. We can believe that, a bottle, as they showed in that film when we were kids, what's it called? The gods must be crazy. That a bottle could be something, that it is not. But if we know what a bottle is, then we know what it is. So in the same way, I think that, Rastafari need to hold on to the Asian precept that Rasta know, Rasta don't believe. And with that, we can move into the future calmly and courageously, as Kalimawi Haile Selassie said. Also, that, as we think about the new faculty of interpretation idea that has been advanced, I think, as I mentioned earlier on, we also need to be looking at how new are these ideas. These ideas are within us. These ideas are us. So in other words, we are not simply creating a new faculty, so to speak, but we are returning to our original faculty of interpretation. I want to also give thanks to Jaes for putting that link about the word Ethiopia in the chat, and we'll make sure to edify through that. And so I give thanks for everyone's presence, and I give thanks for everyone's contributions, and I give thanks for the day. So I want to hold on to our creed, which is what we will actually be doing when we talk about being active according to the principles of Pan-Africanism, that the hungry be fed, the naked clothed, the sick nourished, the aged protected, and the infants cared for. So one black love, Rastafari, every time. Give thanks.
Give thanks, Prof, for the presentation. Give thanks, Empress, for staying true for the reasoning. We will reconvene on 11th January for another presentation. We'll share updates on the various platforms. We give thanks, Rastafari. Radio.